Leta Herman, welcome back.
Thank you, Gary. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, no, it's awesome to see you again. First of all, I just want to say, I didn't get a chance to say this to you when we were just talking before the episode, but your studio, your space is so beautiful.
Thank you.
The Alchemy Healing Center in Northampton, Massachusetts, where I went for my treatment last month. I will say that when I get treatments, I've gone to a lot of different acupressurists. I've gone to a lot of different acupuncturists, really any kind of healing modality. For whatever reason, and maybe I don't think it's like I'm a snob. I just think that I need the energy to be on point. Like I've been to some renowned acupuncturists that do amazing work. But their offices, for whatever reason, like will be in like Midtown Manhattan with like fluorescent lighting, and like you feel like you're kind of in a cubicle, and it just doesn't feel very healthy. I don't feel at peace, and the treatments are, could be great, but I just feel like it's the ambiance and the environment isn't done right, it kind of doesn't round out the whole treatment for me. And so your space, and I took some pictures of it and some video, which I'll probably post on our social accounts. Yeah. Well, it's just, you've kind of curated it in a really just beautiful way, and it's open. There's a lot of space, but it's also not sterile, and the aesthetic is warm, even though there's it's like lofty. And I think that alone is really important, and it makes a nice impression to somebody who's coming in. So kudos to you on putting together a beautiful space.
Thank you. Yeah. And I have to say, it's the co-owner of Alchemy Healing Center, Jay McElroy. It's really her amazing design sense that put that together, and just coming together, the two of us, and me wanting that sense of peace and something that doesn't feel like a doctor's office, that doesn't feel sterile, that feels welcoming and different, not. The building is actually in an old school building. It's over 100 years old.
I was going to say, is that a school building? Yeah. It really felt like a school, a converted school building, which on its own would be really sterile with the brick and all that. It's not one of the ones, just so people that are listening, not a schoolhouse like it's wooden from like 1910, like Little House on the Prairie. This is more of a 1940s, 1950s brick kind of school building. But you've converted it in a way that's super cool and super warm and intimate. Yes. Props to Jay for that.
Yes. And then the whole theme of it is alchemy. We had a photo from the mountain where we're going to talk about the person today, Sun Si Miao, who created the Ghost Point treatment. His mountain, I took a photo there of a yin-yang symbol on its side, which is the whole theme of alchemy is represented by that. And then every door in the center has the yin-yang symbol on its side, and the entryway is meant to look like the door that I think, Gary, you mentioned the door. Where you're like, where's the door? Where's the door?
I'm embarrassed. I'm going to make
it's in China.
I'm going to make a confession to everybody here. I drove up a couple hours to this space. I'm outside. It's pretty much time for the appointment. I'm waiting in the car because I'm looking at this building, and I think it's the right address. But on the Alchemy Healing Center's website, they have this huge red door, and I always thought that was the front door of their space. So I'm looking around, and I'm like, where is this building? I don't see it. And I just walked up to the building I thought it might be, and I called them, and they're like, yeah, it's us. And I didn't really get it. I'm like, okay. And I go inside and I ask Leta, like, hey, by the way, where's the red door that I saw? It's not here. And that's why I was lost. And Leta very compassionately let me know, no, that's just a symbol. That's a door in China. It's not our door. And so I was humbled, but also I thought it was pretty cool in finding that out.
Yeah.
So anyway, anybody who's listening who has any interest in any kind of alchemical treatments and going to Leta's center, just know that it's beautiful, and you'll feel warmth, and you'll feel an intimate vibe the minute you walk in. So that's my early plug for checking out the center. So
thank you.
Yeah. So I want to talk about so for everybody who hasn't listened to the first episode you and I did a few weeks back, we had talked about what kind of got you into alchemy. We talked about what alchemy was. We discussed what various treatments were. We discussed the topics of your book behind you there on the shelf, Through the Mystery Gate, and talked about how you structured it. And then we discussed how I was going to do a treatment with you, and the treatment that you had recommended was the 13 Ghost Points treatment. And so we sort of started to talk about what that would look like. But obviously, until you get into it, and until I experience it, it's kind of abstract. It's kind of in theory. But now, this episode is intended to kind of inform people about what my experience of the treatment was. I'd like to hear about what your experience of the treatment was, and then have you kind of first preface it by talking about what exactly is a 13 Ghost Points treatment, and sort of why you felt like it would be a good treatment for me to go through. And then we'll talk about sort of what I've experienced since then, and you can kind of opine on those observations.
Great.
So without further ado, why don't you kind of just help people understand what exactly is a 13 Ghost Points treatment?
Okay. So the 13 Ghost Points was put together by the guy where the door comes from. His name's Sun Si Miao, and that door photo that we fashioned the whole clinic after was from his place. And Sun Si Miao didn't invent the Ghost Points. The Ghost Points were invented much earlier, like BCE, like 407, in the 300s. So maybe Sun Si Miao lived in the 500s. So I think it was like 700 or 800 years before. So they had been around a long time. Bian K was his name, who created 21 Ghost Points initially. At least that's what we think. I mean, these are all like pre-written down discussions, but then Sun Si Miao is like a legend. I mean, he's known as the king of medicine, and he put in his writings that there are these 13 points. Now he selected them, and he said, whenever that there's something disturbing a person's spirit, it's a disturbance. So you could think of that as an obsessive way of thinking. You could think of that as extreme anxiety. You could think of that as, like OCD. You could think of that as just depression, all these things. But something is disturbing a person's Shen. So the Shen is the spirit, and that's what that means. And so he put these together as a way to treat people who have some kind of disturbance. And he called it the 13 Ghost Points. And there's a famous ode or a song that he wrote that describes how to do this treatment. And so, when I heard about this treatment many years ago now, I was fascinated with this idea that, acupuncture in general is trying to kind of get homeostasis and balance in the system, in the body. And that's great. But it doesn't address the really old traumas and hurts and things that have created maybe some of these other disturbances in a person. And so while it can help with some of the emotional, stuff that's coming up, it might ease it. It doesn't get rid of it. It doesn't clear it. And so Sun Si Miao's point was we have to do something that's deeper than that. We have to get in at a different level. And that's where the Ghost Points came in. And so that's kind of like what I started doing now, probably 15 years ago, was really get into doing that. And in the beginning, I only did that with people who were severely impacted in their lives by these issues. And then over time, I think I said this last time, over time, I started to realize, wow, so many of us need this. I mean, anxiety is almost a buzzword right now. It's like everybody has anxiety. I think it's like cultural at this point. So honestly, it's hard for me to find someone who doesn't need this treatment in terms of that kind of issue, because, anxiety is our minds just out of control, just trying to work out, the future, trying to figure it out. And depression is our minds trying to work out the past. It's like, oh, if that hadn't happened, if this hadn't happened. And so the 13 Ghost Points can address sort of these things that we're holding in our bodies, and often cellularly in our bodies, like somatic work, somatic psychology has become a big deal right now because we're realizing that it's not just the mind, that it has a seat in the body, it has a place in the body that these things get stored. And the ghost points are working vibrationally in the body. Actually, we're vibrating points so that it releases these cellular patterns that relate to our emotional states. So
yeah, and so speaking of that, I'll just give one anecdote about my experience. So when you said it was a vibrational treatment, I kind of didn't really understand it at first because it was theoretical. It was sort of just you're saying it, and conceptually, intellectually, I understood it.
Right.
But until I laid down on the table and we actually went through the points, and you were administering the points, it wasn't until then when I was like, oh, okay, actual vibration. Because I'll just say there was one point in particular which I had let you know on the back of my neck. And what point is that exactly?
That point is called Dew 16, and it relates to wind. It's called ghost pillow. Like when you lie on a pillow, that's the spot, like on the back of your head under your occiput, that's being supported by a pillow.
And what's the significance of that point?
That point is, I believe that in order for us to sleep at night, in deep sleep, we have to not be vigilantly watching the world around us to protect ourselves. So if you think like if you're sleeping in a place that's unsafe, you can't settle into deep sleep. So the ghost pillow is about deep sleep. Can I get into that really deep sleep at night? It's also about, because a lot of those sort of fears that cause us to be so vigilant, those fears come from unconscious beliefs. Like we can say, hey, it's safe, it's fine. Like there's nothing here that's a problem, but you might have PTSD from some past event when you were sleeping. And so then it doesn't matter your conscious mind, what it's thinking, the unconscious beliefs are what's disturbing the sleep. So it's primarily a sleep point, but I say it's for unconscious beliefs as well.
Interesting. Yeah, that definitely resonates. These are issues that I definitely contend with. I've had spotty sleep because of these exact things, feeling like I got to sleep with one eye open, that I'm not safe, even when I'm in a really safe place. And it kind of explains why, of all the points, that's the one that kind of I actually felt physiological vibration in my chest to the point that I was overcome by it. And it felt as if I was going to have like an emotional breakthrough. It felt as if like I was being overwhelmed. And I was probably about to start to cry for no reason, for in my mind, no reason, right? But it felt like I was about to start to cry, and I was kind of cool with it. I was kind of like, whoa, feel this emotion. It was kind of on one level, on one hand, it was a little like, whoa, I might be out of control in a minute. I might not be in control of what my body's about to do. So there's a little fear around that. But then also it was kind of like the part of me that wants to self-explore was like, let's move forward. Let's go. Let's see what happens here. And I was kind of on the cusp of it, and I probably should have let you know if I realized after the fact that was happening, greater than I did. I think I brought it up, but it was not really emphatic about it, because then we could have stayed there a little bit, and who knows what kind of reaction I would have had. But the reason I bring it up is because you say it's a vibrational treatment, and it was finally at that point that I realized, oh, there's actual vibration happening in my body. This is a real thing. This is not just a conceptual. That's not a buzzword you throw onto the treatment. It quite literally feels like there's a vibration happening within for me, it went to the chest from the neck. But it was amazing to experience that. I felt alive. I felt like, okay, here we are. Like I'm not apathetic. I'm not numb. I'm not feeling anything. I'm really feeling something powerful here. And it was really cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool.
And the other thing, Gary, is like, okay, so that point gets in at your deep unconscious level. So you don't know why, these are things you don't remember. So, or maybe you remember, but you haven't thought of, and it's not coming up to your conscious mind. And so that, I didn't know why I'm going to cry. I just have the feeling that I'm going to cry. That's a typical thing for that point. And I want to say that, I meet people who every point in this treatment is huge like that. And then I meet a lot of people like you, Gary, where it's 1 or 2 points that really stand out because that's where you stored your stuff. So
right.
you haven't had the extreme amount of, trauma in your life. You've had, relatively speaking, a pretty decent life. And of course, like I said, everyone on this planet, maybe for more than 20 years, has had at least some trauma, but it may not be like this overarching, overwhelming thing. So not every point was like hitting home because there really wasn't much to work with. But this point for you, that's the one you reported that was like really big, got to be really big. And the good news is, like, because Gary and I moved on eventually, we spent a bunch of time on that point. Each of these points can be up to an hour long. And, maybe for Gary, we should have spent an hour. But, eventually I felt that the point cleared and we moved on. And so what's really cool is then we can go back and do that point again, just the one point, because we know that sort of like maybe has multiple layers, like an onion. And perhaps that day, that's what we needed to do. And then another day, we could eventually go back and just work with the 1 point instead of all 13.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I was going to ask you actually after we discuss the experience of it all, like what then is the follow-up? Like where do you take it from there? But before we go there, I just want to comment on a few of my sort of sensory experiences there, because
Great.
When you walk in, Leta and I first chat. We talk about kind of what's going on, and there's a period of time where we discussed a little bit, not a lot, but get into some discussion about sort of what, what's coming up for me and kind of what's going on in my life in some ways. And then we get into, pretty sure you took you took pulses, right? Did a pulse diagnosis, and
yes.
You were able to determine, as Chinese medicine practitioners do, you were able to determine a lot from taking my pulses and feeling where they were, feeling the quality of the pulses. For those who don't know what a pulse diagnosis is, can you just kind of give a summary of that?
Yeah, sure. So it's basically a little bit like reflexology, if you think about it. Like when people say, "Oh, a point on your foot relates to your liver or whatever," and so it's actually also, there's a reflexology where the points on your wrists relate to different organs, and there's 6 positions, 3 on each hand, and each position relates to 2 of the organs. So that's a total of 12. So we say there are 12 primary meridians. So like the first position on this hand, on my left hand, is the heart meridian. And so when I put my finger there, I'm listening to the heart and just sort of assessing, like, oh, does it feel relaxed? Is it tight? And is it, stressed? Is it skipping beats? Is it, there's all kinds of things that can happen, or fast a pulse, or really, really rapid pulse, or a slow pulse. So these are all things that we evaluate. And then that information really, just for regular acupuncture, that gives us a lot of information about what to do with a person energetically in a treatment.
Yeah. And I've had that many times in pretty much every acupressurist or acupuncturist I've seen usually does start with a pulse diagnosis. Right. But it was interesting to see it in this setting, because I didn't know if, given that this is such a sort of elaborate, in my mind, such a big treatment, right? So it's many hours, and it's just, you're spending so much time with each point. Whereas in acupuncture, normally it's a 45 to 60-minute session. You're doing a bunch of points. If anything, you might have the needles in for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and that's about it. This was a whole different sort of atmosphere. So it's cool that consistency is still there. You're still measuring what's going on beforehand and kind of what the result of the treatment was after with that pulse diagnosis.
Yes.
One of the things I want to talk about is you have music playing in the background. And normally if you go to an acupressurist or acupuncturist session, it's sort of nice background noise. Sort of like, oh, this is, we put some peaceful Zen flute or something, or some
Yes.
natural,
Yes.
some rain, maybe some rain in the background, just to make you at ease. And it's beautiful. I actually love it. But it doesn't really have necessarily any true significance specifically to the treatment. Whereas in this case, you've sort of cultivated this interesting component to the process, to the treatment, where the music is kind of randomized, and you say it has significance to the treatment itself. Can you just kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So years ago, we didn't have iPods when I started. It's hard to believe a time before iPods, but we had people bring CDs because the treatment is meant to be vibrational. And in ancient times, the treatment had actual musicians playing, cymbals and drums and flute and all these things.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So the idea is that music is moving some of these deep buried things. And so again, vibration in the sound waves around you, plus the vibration of my fingers on the points, together start to break up old patterns. And so when we worked with the CDs, it didn't work so great because people brought their favorite music. And it was nice, but that wasn't going to stir them up necessarily. And so once I got an iPod years ago, I started just putting tons and tons of music that was randomly selected. So it was all genres, no holding back, not just pretty music, but, punk rock and heavy metal and everything you could imagine. And so now I have 20,000 songs on a computer that we just shuffle. And the idea is that it sort of guides me as the practitioner, it guides the treatment, and it also really evokes a lot of emotion for people in general. And some people are less attuned to music and they don't notice, and that's fine. We don't need to make a big deal out of it. But sometimes it's so kind of miraculous. Like some of the music that comes up, people are just blown away. I call it's your divine DJ because it just happens over and over and over and over again. And a lot of people know that when you shuffle music, like some really interesting songs come up. But this is freaky weird. Like it happens over and over and over again.
Yeah, I thought it was a really cool element because you kept kind of pointing the attention to it. And when I would notice it, it definitely had that effect. It was not background music, like I'm used to in a session. It was kind of something that not only did it provoke, but it got me away from sort of being in my head and being conceptual about what you were doing and conceptual about the points. Right. And what I tend to do is put too much, I go into concept, I go into intellectual mode where I'll think, well, if this point is supposed to be doing this, then I should be aware of X, Y, and Z. And I think that I have to present myself or do things that are going to open me up to those points when in reality, it's probably, sort of a disconnect if I'm doing that, if I'm just more in my body, not doing my best to kind of not really get focused on thoughts. And I can kind of focus on, for example, the music, pay attention to what the lyrics are, what the melody is making me feel. I could be more immersed in the treatment, and also I'll be impacted by the significance of what those songs are. So I found that to be a really cool element to it as well. And I think you give songs to people that were in the treatment after the fact. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just so they can have it and they can kind of appreciate it.
Yes. And the other thing, Gary, with you in particular, we talked last time about you being wood and the wood element. What you just described, it's really important because there might be another elemental type, especially metal, that is going to listen to the music naturally. They're going to be really attuned to it because they're just really more aware of their environment and not thinking so much. And so wood is the opposite. Wood is I got to, constantly be on top of things. I got to be aware. Like you said, I wanted to be in control when this point kind of made me feel out of control. That's a wood element thing. And so I know that. So I know that if I call attention to this song is actually saying exactly the sentiment of what you're talking about right now. That's really cool. And then you get really interested in that and then you get out of your head. And so just knowing your element, I was able to kind of bring in some things that would enable you to kind of settle more into the treatment, get out of your head, get into your heart. So that's another thing about the music that is really handy for certain types of people who, maybe are, overseeing everything all the time. That's your element.
Yeah, that is me in a nutshell perfectly. So I couldn't be more appreciative of the music for that reason, because it's something I contend with. I don't love it. It's just is there. I've got to work with that, my condition. Yeah. But it is what it is. And actually, on that point, before we started the treatment, we did this series of walking, pacing back and forth outside the treatment room, and you were looking for something in me in the way that I was walking, I guess, and this was to determine my element structure, or how the sort of my element breakdown. Can you help people understand what the heck is significant about someone walking, and why the way they walk could tell you something about how they are?
Yes. So the Chinese, many of us have heard of yin and yang, and we kind of know that those are opposites, but most of us don't even know what yin and yang really means. And yang is things that are up and out and expressive, and yin are things that kind of are quiet and condensed and downward. But what they did is they said, well, that's just two things. That's too simplistic. We can't describe all of nature with two things. We need five things to describe all of nature, because like some things are rising up and expanding, but they do it differently. Like some things go really fast and like really intense. So that would be the wood element. And then some things are kind of like rising up softly, like wafting almost, like up in the air, and that would be fire. And I can go through each one if you want, but the things that are kind of like in the middle of yin and yang, that's the fifth extra element, is meaning not the seasons, but there's another element in the middle of everything, which is neither yin or yang, or both, and that's earth. And then things descend, right? So we get to the top, and then things fall down again. And then are they falling down kind of like, wafting gradually? That would be metal. Or are they like really getting intensely compacted and a lot of power is being generated? And that would be water. So as we look at these five elements, we need to apply them to everything around us, including nature. But definitely for practitioners, we need to know what element you are. That means we need to know what your energetic makeup is, your temperament. And so when I watched you walk, what I'm looking at is a lot of people might try to convince me they're wood or something else, because they're mentally like, ooh, I want to be wood, or I want to be fire, whatever it is, right? But when they walk, the hips don't lie. Like, it's like I see it in the body, and actually each element walks differently. And so what we were evaluating, Gary, is whether or not you had that wood walk, which typically has a lot of energy in the diaphragm. And so much so that it's almost like that it puffs out a little bit and the elbows come out from the sides. And then we were also assessing, Gary, not just your first element, but we can see hints of the second and third element, because you have all five elements, but in a particular order. And it helps us to know your second and third element too when we're working with you, especially with alchemy.
Why does it help to know the second and third element? How do they affect the first element? Just curious.
Well, the second element is kind of like there's so many different types of wood people, so many different types of fire people. And the second element, I'm like, it's a flavor. It's like, the wood is, if you eat ice cream, you're eating ice cream. It doesn't matter what flavor. That's the first element. And then, but what flavor? And that's the second element. And the third element is like, well, am I getting sprinkles on top or something else? It's just a little tiny bit of something that's added in. And for you in particular, I think we were trying to assess whether, and now I'm trying to remember if water was second or fire. And I believe after you surprised me a little bit, because I thought fire was second, and instead it was water. And why is that important? So Gary is kind of a force in the world, and if the water was third and the fire was second, you would have been a little softer. And so by putting the water there, it's a constant surge of energy behind this really lovely, assertive, energy in the world, completely engaged. So wood on its own is just engaged. It's very much a leader, directive, all these words. But you put water behind it, and it gives it some stamina, some power that won't let up. And that's, why you've reported you can do so many things and not stop. And that's the water in you.
Yeah, that was really interesting to hear. I love the idea of how, because it's really kind of spot on from my experience. So to hear how that water element affects the first element, the wood element, which is also spot on, to me, it just rings true in my experience. And so I found that really cool to have that nuance and observation of, which really, as a practitioner, I'm assuming can only help you apply a treatment even better once you know that, because you kind of nailed it. And I guess, like you said, some people might have an idea of what they'd like to be or what someone else told them they are. And so just by verbally telling you that, that's not going to be sufficient. You need to have sort of a litmus test that's more trustworthy. And that's why I really like to see the sort of walking thing. At first, I thought it was very strange. But then, especially when I want to talk about this too, you actually at one point compared, we walked side by side with your partner, Jay, and you made us compare. And I almost felt like we were competing in some way. But so here we are, like brisk walk racing down this hallway, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I'm just trusting that this is not for no reason, that there's something going on here. But it ultimately it informed you and it informed Jay. Why did you compare us to? Just curious about that.
Because you guys have similar energetics. And I was debating again whether water was second or third. And I knew if I could see you walking next to someone who I knew their elemental stack up, it would help me understand the difference or the similarity between you and, in this case, Jay, who happened to be there and was also helping because she's, like I said, the co-owner of the Alchemy Healing Center. And she's amazing at being able to help with the 5 elements with her alchemical coaching work. So through watching that you two walk together, I could see there was a subtle difference. So you two weren't the exact same. And that really helped a lot because I could see that you were pushing faster forward than she was, because she doesn't have water second, but she's also wood. And so by seeing that you guys don't have sort of quite the same second element, that really showed up in your walk.
Got it. Really interesting. Yeah. And it's funny because after that, Jay asked me a few questions. She got right to the point. She asked like 2 questions and like, boom, boom, there he is. It's this and that. And I think she asked me what I like to do for a hobby. I said, I run marathons. And then she asked me, well, why do you do that? And I think I said for the challenge of it, or for, whatever. Well, I think it was the challenge of it. And she said, yep, there he is. And, I think she said wood and water. We got it right. And she just kind of walked away. Like she was like, mic drop. Just kind of was like, I'm done. I'm done here. Yes. Yeah. I'm going back to lunch. You need me for anything else? Like, nope, we're good. We'll go to treatment.
That's it.
Yeah, it was awesome. I mean, Jay's efficient, right?
Because like the answer you gave was just so perfect and spot on, because we were even wondering when we saw your walk whether water could be first and wood second. So that's why she really honed in on the particular questions. And when you said the marathon and and also you gave a little more information, how you ran it, what you did to accomplish that feat of running a marathon was a typical wood element thing, and sort of maybe overdoing a little bit, pushing yourself really hard. The challenge was really important. And then the ability and the stamina to stick with it is the water. So the wood is like, I'm going to do something, really amazing, and I'm going to accept this challenge. And then the water was the one that like really gave you the stamina to get through.
Yeah. And the water is also the reason why I'm going to get an MRI on Friday and have my ankle checked out even further and see what's going on here. Anyway, so I want to talk about, I'll just kind of give you sort of a brief post-mortem, right? Just talk
Okay, great.
about what I've experienced after the fact. Because I was trying to look to observations to be able to, the rational part of me, the wood part of me wants to be able to quantify it and feel like, all right,
Excellent.
well, how can I give a metric of like what I feel like has changed that we could maybe attribute to the treatment. And it's not that simple. Like, it's not like I can look and say, well, it led to X, Y, and Z directly. But I'll talk about, I do have since the middle of December when I did this treatment with you, I do notice that there seems to be greater clarity in my life. And so I was already trending towards creating more clarity, but I feel like since the treatment, I've had a lot more deliberateness, a lot more intentionality. So there are ideas of things I need to take action on that maybe I wasn't, or maybe I kind of was hesitating on, that have now become more clear to me. And I feel like more emboldened to take these actions to kind of create even greater clarity in my life and create less noise, less uncertainty. And so that's something that I think that of all things is probably the most impactful and most profound observation that I've had is that I'm clearing the plate further and further and being more intentional in how I do that, so that I'm setting myself up for even further, spiritual work, or even further sort of internal energy work that I feel open to, which before might have been more obscure, or it might have been not as obvious. So that's probably the number one big takeaway I have, is that I feel empowered or ready to kind of act. That's one thing.
And I could just say,
heard before?
Yeah, I could also say that that's pretty typical because, like, for example, the point you talked about behind your head, which is working on the unconscious stuff. So what you don't think about every day in your life is like the confusion you may feel in a day-to-day, situation, maybe about like a person that you're having a relationship with, or a job, or, you're confused. It's like, what should I do? There's, and you think it's because there's different factors, but what you don't realize is some of your unconscious beliefs are at work in sort of trying to kind of manipulate your true way of being, because they're from the past, and they're like, oh, there's these beliefs that if I do that, I'm not lovable. Or if I do this, it means I'm not worthy. Or, these are like deep unconscious beliefs. And so when we clear those, suddenly like so much clarity comes for people, because they're no longer fighting in themselves against things. And then you can just say, oh, look at this situation. It's obvious what I need to do. And I've known it all along, but I couldn't make myself get the clarity to do it. And that's a typical ghost point, feeling afterwards. And it's only been a month, Gary. I tell people that this treatment works for 3 to 6 months. So it takes a month to sometimes really articulate what you just said. So I usually give people at least a month before they really evaluate what's changed. So this is perfect timing. And then you ask what's the future. So in 3 to 6 months, definitely 3 months, I find people's lives have changed dramatically. And 6 months, I feel like it's still integrating as we go forward. So, this will continue to kind of play out, even though now you can articulate it. The reason it takes time is that you have so many habits in your life that are built on those unconscious beliefs or other things that the treatment works on. So you have these habits like, I'm safe in the world as long as I behave like this. And this could be anything, but it's like that's some kind of weird, mental state you develop maybe at the age of 5, maybe at the age of 10, it doesn't matter. But I know if I behave like this, I'm safe. And then when we take that away and you don't need to do that anymore and you can still be safe, it's like, oh, like I'm free. So now you're free to be your authentic self.
It's interesting when I think about that. As we were talking about it, I started to think about the things I want to be intentional about. And it was actually stirring up emotion in my chest and in my stomach, which is kind of rare for me. Not that I'm devoid of emotion or I have a black heart or anything, but it's rare that I feel stirred up in that way. Normally I feel pretty placid, pretty tranquil. But I think it just kind of reiterates to me, just shows to me that it's provoking what it needs to provoke. Because even just thinking back on my experience and the treatment and thinking back about how it's affected me and what I feel empowered about, it's stirring up stuff. And the reason why a lot of the people that I talk to about, change, about personal change, internal change, alchemy, they very often can't articulate why it's so hard for them to change a certain thing. They know there's discomfort there, and they know that the lack of change is causing a lot of pain and suffering in their lives. But it's I find that it's not often that people articulate or are able to express, here's exactly why I am unable to change this situation. Yeah. But when you peel it back a little bit, get to talking with them, to me, it's what I hear is not only is it just an obvious conceptual block, like I've got to change this, but I can't because I believe this and this and this will happen, right? And I don't know that I'm ready for that conceptually. They might even be thinking about what the emotional experience will be like, right? And they're not prepared to deal with the consequences of what the true change that needs to happen in their lives to create happiness or create tranquility is. But what I pay attention to more is that they'll say that there's a feeling that comes up when they think about this. There's actual. So I think that if we were just intellectual beings and we just said, hey, I know that I've got to do X, Y, and Z to make my life better, but I also know that doing X, Y, and Z is going to lead to some rough consequences for me. Maybe it's going to stir up emotion. I'm going to be really sad, despondent. I'm going to feel bad about myself, whatever. Even if it were just concept and it stayed there, I think more people would be able to move through that. But what actually happens is you don't just have that conceptual awareness that the consequences are going to happen. It creates a feeling, and the feeling can be gripping, and the feeling can be scary. It could be like, it's a feeling in your stomach, it's a feeling in your chest, wherever you feel it in your body, but it could be something that when you think about taking these bold actions that you know or believe are going to change you for the better, the uncertainty of it actually creates a physiological response that feels like you don't have control, or feels like you're so worried. It creates anxiety in a way that's visceral. That's what I notice prevents people from taking this kind of bold action, because most people are not prepared to deal with that feeling, or prepared to experience the feeling of it, not just the tangible consequences of the rational. Well, if I divorce that person, that means that I'm going to have 50-50 custody with the kids, and then I've got to break up my wealth, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, that's part of it. But when you're thinking about what that all looks like, and when you're conceiving of what that's going to play out like, the feeling that comes over you when that happens, that alone usually paralyzes people. And so you just say, it's not worth it. I don't want to contend with the rational reality of what that look, the on paper reality, but I definitely don't want to contend with the feelings. If I'm just having these feelings right now, thinking about it, oh my God, what's going to happen when I do it? And that's my experience too. And anytime that I've been stuck, but this, and
I would ask you, and I would ask anyone that's having that is like, what stirred up that feeling? And we have something called the 9 palaces. So if I asked you, did it have to do with relationship? Did it have to do with your health? Did it have to do with your wealth? Like, we start to name these things. Did it have to do with your creative projects? Did it have to do with travel, wisdom, your career, your home? These are the 9 palaces. And so sometimes people can say, that feeling came because I had a thought about my relationship. And so that helps us start to tease apart that feeling, because like you said, the feeling is not really understood. And also the 5 elements help, because remember I said that third element is kind of important, and it's actually way more important than you'd think, because I said it's just the sprinkles on top of the ice cream. But it actually is the one where we have a lot of our negative thoughts, negative beliefs. And it's the one that we don't get to have the nice part of that element. It's the really bad, crappy parts of the element. And so it's like nobody loves me, or I'm a piece of crap, or nobody's helping me or supporting me, or, I'm hysterical because it's so scary, or, or I just blame. It's not my fault, it's everyone else's fault, that kind of thing. So those are the third element. So the question would be, when that feeling came up as I was talking, which one of these might it be?
That makes sense. Yeah. I was about to ask you, so what then is the significance of knowing which palace it is? But then you just described it perfectly, that that it kind of gives you a sense of the origin of it. And so you can kind of work with that even further if you're able to kind of label it for what it is.
Right.
That makes sense. So I just love the fact that this is a treatment. This is a not just the treatment, but also alchemy at large. It's intended to work with these unnamed, visceral, primal, sometimes feelings that we have in our bodies that we are often unconscious to, that can control so much for us. Like the fact that we're unconscious to it, and we remain stuck in our habitual patterns that provide us in our mind safety or security, even if they're really not, even if they're not serving us. And very often that's the case. Very often people think their patterns, their habits are their comfort zone, and that is the thing they can cling to provide them security and safety. The idea that we need to shake that up at the visceral, at the visceral level, at the physiological level, is so logical to me. It's so intuitive to me, right? It just feels right, because you can't get at that with words. You can't get at that with providing somebody the concepts or the rational. If it's unconscious, what the heck does it matter that I'm going to tell you what's going on? Like, that doesn't matter. We could talk about it till we're blue in the face, but if I'm not conscious to it, and every time it appears, I'm just like, there it is again, and I don't know what to do with it, then what good is pointing it out or just putting words to it? We got to do something. It's going to vibrate it. It's going to shake it up. It's going to change the flow of it. And that's why I love alchemy. That's why I love having learned about it. That's why I love Chinese medicine as a whole, and Taoist principles as a whole, because they're focused on shaking us up in this way. It's not about, it's like talk is cheap kind of thing, which is kind of funny, because I'm a philosopher at heart, and I'm somebody who values talk, and I value rationality, and I value intellect. But I've also become fully aware of how unconscious I've been to certain things, and how reifying my intellect, reifying my rationality has actually created greater problems for me, has created further reliance on habitual patterns that were not serving me, because you find ways to rationalize them.
And actually, the ghost points are amazing for breaking up the habitual patterns. And the very definition in Chinese medicine of aging is developing habits of being that you are rigidly stuck to. And then, as you get more and more and more of those, think of an elderly person who's very sort of stuck in their ways. That's the very definition of aging. And so in alchemy, the ghost points kind of clear a lot of that away, get you back to like a blank slate. And then we do more alchemy after that. This isn't the goal of alchemy isn't just to clear, it's to evolve. And so as you work through stages of alchemy, I wanted to point out that stage 4 of alchemy is the child's mind, where you let go of all those habits of thinking and all those beliefs where, if I walk this way, my back doesn't hurt, or, whatever. And so that's a very adult way of habitually being in the world. A child's jumping all around and doing skipping, and they don't walk in a habitual way. They don't think in a habitual way. They don't see the world in a habitual way. And so the 13 ghost points is just the first step on clearing away some of this baggage that we're carrying.
It's so interesting that the Chinese refer to aging that way, because I've been noticing a lot of folks that are getting up there in age around me and my kind of inner circle, where I wonder what this phenomenon of clinging to rigid ideologies is. I see that when you'd think that, from my experience, it's more often that as people grow older, they tend to grow even more reliant on their righteousness, and they're more emboldened in being right, and they're more emboldened in who they are from an identity perspective, and they're less flexible in being open to new ideas, having their ideas challenged, or even trying new things. And I automatically equate that with aging. I automatically think that that's these are not great qualities. These are not going to help you grow as a human. I do my best to constantly self-analyze and say, well, what can I change? How can I be open to others' criticism and not take offense to it, not get defensive, but allow it to sort of inform where I'm rigid, where I have, and how can I be flexible? And it's a battle because I think we tend towards safety, and safety for us means I need to know what my identity looks like, and I need to have firm beliefs. And in my experience, that just doesn't work out very well the more I do that. So when I notice that I recoil from people that are more emboldened in that way, or at least I steer the conversation to something safe, because I feel like there's so many unsafe areas that you can go where someone's going to feel threatened, and I don't want to, I don't want people to feel threatened. So very often, I'll just know who I have to kind of tiptoe away from. But then I also realized just recently, actually, on social media, I've been, for whatever reason, and this nails it, there's a few stories in the last few days of older folks who are trying new things. So there's this guy who's like 84, who's an amazing skateboarder in the UK. And I'm watching him and I'm like, this is awesome. He's like, I just picked it up 2 years ago at 82. And he's like doing things on the skateboard that I could never, ever do. And I used to skateboard for years as a kid. And it's just so fun to watch the guy. And he said, I was always an inline skater. Always. He picked it up 15 years earlier. So when he was 67. So he didn't even do any skating until 67, where he started rollerblading. And then he became a great rollerblader. And then at 82, his friends were like, you should skateboard. And he just picked up a skateboard. Now he's doing that. And I thought, this is unbelievable. And then
that's
another
an alchemist.
Story. Yeah.
That is an alchemist.
There's a woman I follow on Twitter who I'm into NFTs, as you know, and I'm into cryptocurrency. And I think there's a lot of interesting use cases and a lot of change to be had around that stuff. And so there's this, and it's known to be like, I'm like a grandfather in that space. Like, it's known to be a young person's space, the NFT space in particular. It's a lot of young creatives. The devs, the developers that are working on it tend to be younger. It's the lingo that's used is like, like young people lingo. It's like a lot of like street culture stuff. And so I love it. But for me, it's like challenging it's learning new things, and it's challenging my patterns and challenging my awareness of what things are. There's a woman in the space who's, I think, 81. She's sitting there. I saw this image of her on Twitter, and her daughter created the NFT sort of like process for her, but she's the artist, and she's using 3D art. She's using a program called Blender, which is really familiar to people in the 3D art world, in the NFT world, taking like one of these like pens and using it on like a tablet and shading and creating this amazing 3D art, which is mostly done by like super young developers. And she's doing this to needle points that she created in her life like 30, 40, 50 years ago that never sold for anything because she never had a platform. And here she is like tweeting, like, here I am busting out my newest NFT. And she's got a huge collection of NFTs. And I just I've been gravitating to these people because I'm like, this is the image of evolution that I think is so impressive and what I value the most. And it makes sense that the Chinese would see it this way. It's like, you age if you stay rigid, and if in these people's cases, they're alchemists, right? They're not aging. Exactly. Their years are getting up there, but they're staying fresh. They're challenging what they know to be normal and true and good, and so they're just doing different things.
That's why the alchemist theoretically could be immortal, because the truth is, if we could figure out how to regenerate ourselves, we're not on this ever-ending path towards our demise. If we're able to, continuously become that child again. And, inline skater for 15 years got old. So now I'm skateboarder, it's like you're regenerating yourself. So you're literally regenerating the cells in your body when you're being flexible enough to be a new person. So that's the idea.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, how many, not getting into HIPAA violations here, but how many people come to you that are above the age of 65? Do you see that often, or is it?
Yes, certainly. I would say maybe 20%. Yeah, a lot.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
There are people at that age that are doing their best to try to provoke themselves and feel the vibrational elements.
Some of the most wonderful stories I've had are people in their 80s. And the reason that's the case is because if they're really motivated to do this work, they are in often a unique position like retirement, where they don't have to be beholden to society or to family or to, they really are uniquely in this position to be whoever they want to be. And so that's the beauty of, age in our culture, is we give them a lot of leeway. And I think some of the hardest things for them is when their younger relatives are saying you should be, breaking down and you should go into a home and you should do this. And they're like thriving. And I literally have some of their relatives saying, I'm mad at you. You should be you should go to a home and give up. And like siblings get mad because the older one is doing the alchemy and the younger one is falling apart. And they're like, how come you're not falling apart? And it's really interesting. So it is that life affirming and life giving to change your mind, not just your body, to really work on the mind.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There are a few examples of those kinds of people in my life, and they honestly give me strength. They give me a lot of not just inspiration, but they give me strength. I draw strength from their examples, because if they're able to do it at 85, 90, 90 plus, then I damn sure should be able to.
Exactly.
I have all my faculties about me, and they have a lot of more impediments than I do in some ways, and they still don't see those. They don't let them define them. I love that. I want to talk about what happens next. So typically, if someone you see comes to you for a Ghost Points treatment, is it different what you recommend next? Is there a typical protocol? Like, I know that you have the palace work that can be done as far as for folks that don't know what that is, in the alchemy process, you can start to actually hone in and focus on different areas of your sort of being to then do additional work. Like, what's the next step?
Okay, so, the Ghost Points, again, we're trying to get back to a blank slate, meaning what is your authentic self without all the baggage and trauma that you had, but particularly the really bad stuff. And then, that's a one-day treatment. Again, it lasts for 3 to 6 months, the unfolding of it. But during that time, we can begin something that I call the 9 stages of alchemy. And this is a Taoist philosophy that we can kind of walk a road where we're continuously evolving. So, a lot of people who've been studying Buddhism, they talk about enlightenment. So the Taoists might not use exactly that phrase, but it's a little bit like we're cultivating a garden, cultivating ourselves to be, better and better in ourselves. We can think of it as states of awareness. So when we say awake and aware, what does that really mean? It means that you're stepping out of like the lower level state of awareness would be a state of fear. And then, you're working your way up to where you're maybe accessing the sages of old, like, you're downloading, information, there's all kinds of levels of awareness when we say awake and aware. And these stages walk you through that. So the first stage of alchemy is just really getting your, taking advantage of that Ghost Points treatment and just really making life feel easy, which, for most people, life is hard. And so what would it be like to feel ease? And then the second stage is a little bit like a Ghost Point treatment in that It's also working on letting go of stuff. But in this case, second stage, we protect ourselves all the time. And so that has a lot to do with our heart, and we're protecting our heart and our chest. And so the second stage of alchemy is really, allowing ourselves to stop needing to protect. And that's difficult. So sometimes we bring in another long treatment similar to the ghost points, which I nickname the loving yourself treatment, or I also call it the heart pains treatment. You mentioned the 9 palaces. So that has a lot to do with the heart pains treatment. All the areas where you might be carrying heart pain. It's a little different than the ghost points, which are more severe. The heart pains is really just an invitation to open your heart, truly, truly be vulnerable in the world, but not in a way that you're going to get hurt. And then we move on, and there's more stages. I mentioned stage 4, which is like being a child. Stage 5 is like being the wise person, and stage 6 is really like living completely spontaneously, like you're free and easy, but in a way that the metaphor is that you're flying in your life. And I say it's like living your full potential. And so those are some of them. There's 9 of them, but I just gave you the highlights. And there's a few other treatments. Some people are grieving. We need to do a grieving treatment. There's others as well in alchemy, but those are the main, that's sort of the typical path people take.
And the ghost points treatments informs where you go next. Is that right?
Yeah. I almost always start with a ghost point treatment, but some people don't have a lot of trauma. So we just start doing the other work right away and see if we need a ghost points treatment. And that's fine. We can do that. But the ghost points really help us sort of pinpoint the major areas. Like, when you and I worked, that point that you mentioned, it means that there's some unconscious stuff there. And so when we get to stage 2 of alchemy, Gary, then we may uncover that in a whole different way than we did in the ghost points.
Makes sense. I look forward to that, actually.
Yeah.
So here we're kind of coming up on the end of the hour here. I just wanted to find out if I love the fact that we were able to unpack this, and hopefully walking through it from the experiential perspective I had and the experiential perspective you had inform some people greater than just an abstract intellectual discussion of what this treatment might look like. Is there, so I know kind of what lies ahead, and we'll obviously probably unpack this further, and we'll have more discussions about this. And I love learning about this because, like I said, it impacted me physiologically, so I know it's significant. I know there's something telling me, oh, there's work to be done here. And as somebody who loves to always be able to say, like, I've done the work, like, or I'm finished, like, yeah, I've arrived. It's challenging to admit that. It's challenging to say, oh, there's still stuff there going on. But I realize, as you mentioned, Buddhism, and I'm sure Taoists think this too, there's always work to be done, right? You're always sort of evolving to a degree, at least in this visceral world where we're carrying these vessels. Maybe you can arrive at that point where you've reached enlightenment, or you've reached the Taoist version of enlightenment. But most of us have things to work with, even if we think we're doing a good job, even if we believe that we've done a lot of work. Like in my case, and you said, during our treatment, I have seen a lot of practitioners in different areas working with the body, and not just the body, but working with the mind as well. And so there are a lot of these obscure dark spots that I have kind of got into with others and have tried to excavate. But even still, there's more. I know there's more to be done, and there's no shame in that, right? It's not like we should feel bad about that. That's just it's the conditions that we're born into the world with, and we do our best to work with them, and that's really all there is to it.
One of the ghost points is guilt and shame. It's all about guilt and shame. And I don't meet a single person who doesn't have shame about something. I mean, it's almost impossible to be on this planet and not feel like, shame or guilt or, any of these negative feelings like, oh, I want to hide that. It's called ghost hidden. So, then there's no shame. If everyone has shame, then there's no shame in having shame.
Yeah.
It's perfect what you said.
Yeah. It's ironic that we're not aware of that fact, but it's totally true. So we don't have any advertisers here on the Soul Pod, and Leta has never put me up to talking about her place, but I just want to, I love it so much. And I think there's so much value into people doing this work that I just want to continue to plug you again and just say that people should check out the Alchemy Healing Center in Northampton, Massachusetts. Look up Leta Herman. We have the websites will be in the show notes as always. Listen to her podcast with Jay, her partner. It's called Inspired Action Podcast, where they go way into further detail on a lot of these topics or the topic of the day, right? You talk about kind of and it's a light, fun, interesting, inspiring podcast with a lot of great energy. So even if you just want to pick me up, you want to, even if you kind of can't wrap your head around some of these concepts or you don't have the time to listen to many, many sessions, you could just kind of get right into one of them and feel it'll energize you. And so I've listened to a bunch of it and I love it, which is why Leta obviously is such a pro when she's a guest on the podcast, because she does such a great job on her podcast. But anything you would like to plug about your education system, your courses, or anything else?
Yeah, so we have something called the Alchemy Learning Center, and we started this right near the beginning of the pandemic because, we've been teaching live for years. We teach practitioners, we teach lay people, we teach pretty much anyone who wants to know about alchemy. And once the pandemic hit, we were like, we moved everything online, of course, like everyone else. And we created the Alchemy Learning Center. But we're really excited about it, not just because it's online, but because it's a place where people who think like we do, we can all kind of get together, because we think so unusually that it can feel sometimes lonely in the world. Because oftentimes when you start to embrace these concepts, people around you, they're just working on fear and habits and all the things we talked about. And they're just, and then you come along and say, hey, it doesn't have to be like that. And they're like, yeah, it does. You need some compadres, some people who can help you and hold your hand and just be around. And so the Alchemy Learning Center is a place where we have online classes, meditations. We also have apprenticeships where you can, as a practitioner, learn this, which we're really taking this worldwide. We've got people from other countries now that are really interested in joining us, other continents. And then we also have a lot of classes, just like a 5 elements class, what's this 5 elements stuff about? And it's for anyone. So and the apprenticeship, if you love that kind of work and you're not a practitioner, you can still do the apprenticeship, because the parts that are relevant to anyone's life, we allow those people to listen in and understand that as for their own self, cultivation, or because they're like a life coach, or they work with people. Maybe they're a manager of people, or they, I think the best job to learn this stuff would be like people working in the acting industry, people who are trying to, maybe act or even, direct, or, any of these functions where you're trying to understand the nature of people. So all that is in the Alchemy Learning Center. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I personally have to check this out too. When I kind of get a little less busy than I've been lately, I would love to put some time into taking a look and see what courses you've developed there. So I will definitely head over there.
We try to make it fun, just like the podcast. Some of the classes are kind of funny and fun, and they're entertaining. They're not hard. They're not like, I got to get through this material. They're quite entertaining. So that's
great. Yeah. And not having it be dense and too academic or too rigid, I think is going to, won't scare people off the way that it would if you did that. So, exactly. And this is, like you said, it's life, right? So it's fun stuff we should be kind of taking lightly kind of anyway, right? The treatments might be significant and have grave impact, but we need to be kind of light about the way we orient ourselves to ourselves and to the treatments and to knowledge and study, right? It's also supposed to be fun.
I think my job is to make it accessible. And sometimes, my teachers are very heady and they're wonderful, but you have to know a lot of background to get anything out of it. So that's not going to help you to go to some of my teachers, of over the many years. So what I do is I take all that and translate that into day-to-day language that would make sense and appropriate for your life. So even like the elements class is so simplistic and yet very profound, but it's easy to listen to and access. So that's kind of my role in the world, I think.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I mean, that's really what the listener I'm kind of and the viewer I'm trying to reach with the Soul Pod is people who
exactly
want access to these different types of methods that they might not have an awareness about, and they can instantly access it to impact their day right then and there.
Yeah.
And that, I think it's an underserved demographic, I think. And so there's a lot of great value in spending your time and energy in that space. So thank you for that.
Yes, thank you. When I first learned the 5 elements, the first thing I said is, everyone needs to know this stuff. Everybody needs to know this. Why is it just being taught to a select few? So thank you.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thanks so much, Leta.
Okay.
As always, can't wait to see you again next time. I had an amazing time at your treatment. And,
wonderful.
It impacted me in a profound way. And I can say that with full veracity of my body and mind. So I appreciate that.
Awesome. And, I look forward to doing more with you. That'll be great.
Y'all go check Leta out. Northampton, Massachusetts, Alchemy Healing Center. Take care.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks.